The teller looked at the check, looked at me, and said the one sentence I never expected to hear that morning. "Sir, this appears suspicious. I'm going to report it for review." And the strange part was, I wasn't standing there trying to cash some random piece of paper from a stranger. I was holding a $320 insurance payment that had helped keep my brother alive, or at least helped cover the mountain of bills waiting after the worst night of our lives. I had been awake for 19 hours straight, wearing the same faded gray shirt I had slept in at the hospital waiting room, and the last thing I needed was a stranger looking at me like I was some kind of criminal. But that was exactly what happened inside a small branch of North Valley Community Bank on a Tuesday morning. My name is Daniel Mercer, and looking back now, I realized that day wasn't really about a check. It was about how quickly people decide who deserves respect and who doesn't. The night before, I was sitting under those awful fluorescent hospital lights, the kind that make every minute feel longer than it really is, waiting for news about my younger brother Caleb. He had gone into emergency surgery after a serious accident, and the doctors had warned us there were complications. Twice that night, the machines around him went silent in ways that made everyone in the room stop breathing. I remember gripping the coffee cup in my hand so tightly that the cardboard started bending, but I couldn't even taste the coffee anymore. I wasn't thinking about money, work, or anything else. I just wanted my brother to open his eyes again. By sunrise, Caleb was stable, not out of danger, not magically healed, but alive, and that was enough for me. Before heading back to the hospital, I stopped at the bank because I needed to deposit an insurance reimbursement check that had arrived while I was away. It wasn't a fortune. It wasn't some huge transaction that should have attracted attention. It was $320, the kind of amount most people wouldn't even notice. I walked into North Valley Community Bank carrying a plain envelope with every document neatly organized inside. I've always been that way. My father taught me that if you want people to trust you, you show up prepared. So I had the insurance letter, the claim information, the payment explanation, everything. I waited in line quietly, listening to the usual sounds of a bank on a weekday morning. Phones ringing, printers running, people talking about mortgages and deposits. Nobody knew that just a few hours earlier, I was sitting next to a hospital bed, wondering if I was about to lose my only sibling. Nobody knew that I hadn't eaten since the previous afternoon. Nobody knew anything. And honestly, I wasn't expecting anyone to. I just wanted to finish one simple task and get back to my brother. When I reached the counter, the employee behind the glass smiled politely at first. His name tag said Trevor Hale. He looked like someone who had worked there long enough to know every rule in the book, and maybe that was part of the problem. Sometimes people get so comfortable following procedures that they forget there's an actual person standing in front of them. I handed him the check in the envelope. He took the paper between two fingers, lifted it toward the light, flipped it over, then typed something into his computer. At first, I didn't think anything was wrong. Banks check things. I understood that. Security matters. Fraud exists. I wasn't offended by a normal verification process. But then Trevor leaned back slightly, narrowed his eyes at the screen, and said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Sir, this looks like fraud. I'm going to flag it." The entire lobby changed. It was like someone turned down the volume on the room. A woman stopped filling out a deposit slip. An older man sitting in the corner looked up from his newspaper. The people behind me shifted uncomfortably, and there I was, standing at the counter with hospital wristbands still in my pocket from visiting my brother, suddenly feeling like I had walked into the wrong building. I slowly opened the envelope and placed each document on the counter. "I can show you where it came from," I said quietly. "The insurance company sent it. Everything is right there." Trevor barely looked down. "If you can't verify the source immediately, you'll need to step aside and wait for a supervisor." The way he said it bothered me more than the words themselves. It wasn't caution. It wasn't professionalism. It was judgment. And before I could respond, someone behind me finally spoke up. A woman named Melissa Carter, who I had never met before that moment, stepped forward with a folder of her own paperwork in her hands. She looked at Trevor and said, "He just told you he spent the night at the hospital. You're really going to stand there and treat him like he's trying to scam you in front of everyone?" Trevor turned slowly, clearly annoyed that someone else had entered the conversation. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He just turned back to his computer, typed in my information, and said, "Unfollowing procedure." Then he clicked one button, and that one click changed everything. Trevor clicked that one button, and for a few seconds, nothing happened. He looked almost satisfied, like he had finally put the situation where he wanted it. neatly labeled and filed away. But then the computer screen froze. Not the kind of freeze where you wait a few seconds and everything comes back. This was different. The small green check mark that usually appeared after a transaction disappeared, replaced by a bright yellow warning box that filled the center of the monitor. Trevor leaned closer. His confident expression faded just a little. I remember watching his eyes move across the screen. And for the first time that morning, he looked uncertain. The message wasn't saying the check was fake. It wasn't saying the funds were suspicious. It was requesting something completely different. Manager authorization required. Restricted account review. Trevor clicked again, probably thinking it was just a technical issue. But the system wouldn't let him continue. He tried to close the window. Nothing. He tried to restart the transaction. Nothing. The computer had locked him out, and then another notification appeared beneath the first one. Account status. Executive Advisory Member, Regional Financial Committee. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The room had already noticed the change in his face. You could almost feel the air shift. The same man who had been so quick to announce that something looked like fraud suddenly realized he had made assumptions about someone he knew nothing about. But what happened next was the part I still think about years later. Because, the truth is, my position didn't make me more deserving of respect. I shouldn't have needed a title, a position, or a special account status for someone to treat me like a human being. The reason the moment mattered wasn't because Trevor discovered who I was. It mattered because everyone in that lobby saw how differently people are treated when others believe they have power. A minute later, the branch manager came out from the office. Her name was Karen Whitmore, and she had the kind of calm expression people develop after years of handling problems. She looked at the screen first, then at Trevor, then at me. She didn't need a long explanation. She understood immediately. "Mr. Mercer," she said, walking toward the counter, "I owe you an apology." The entire lobby went quiet again, but this time it felt different. What happened here should not have happened. Not to you, and not to anyone who walks through these doors. What stood out to me was that she didn't whisper it. She didn't pull me aside and apologize privately to make the situation disappear. She said it right there, at the same counter where Trevor had made his accusation. I appreciated that more than she probably realized. Because embarrassment doesn't disappear when someone quietly fixes the problem. Sometimes people need to see accountability happen. Karen processed the deposit herself, carefully reviewing every document I had brought. She even apologized for how long it took and offered me a coffee while I waited. I laughed a little and told her, "Honestly, I think I've had enough coffee to last me a lifetime." It was the first time that morning I smiled. She smiled back, and for a brief moment, the tension in the room finally broke. But the story didn't end there. While I was leaving, I noticed Melissa, the woman who had spoken up for me, was still standing in line. She had probably lost 15 minutes because she decided to say something when nobody else did. Most people had looked away. Most people had stayed silent. She didn't. I walked over and thanked her. She shrugged and said, "I just said what everyone else was thinking." That sentence stayed with me because it was true. A lot of people notice when something is wrong. The difference is, not everyone is willing to be the person who says something. We talked for a few minutes, and I found out she worked as a financial assistant for a local company. She mentioned she had been trying to move into a higher-level position, but hadn't had much luck. I reached into my wallet and handed her my business card. "My company is hiring a senior analyst," I told her. "I don't know if it's what you're looking for, but if you're interested, give me a call." She looked at the card, then back at me. "Are you serious?" she asked. I smiled and said, "Yeah. Someone who's willing to stand up for a stranger is exactly the kind of person I want around my team." She thanked me, but honestly, I felt like I was the one who owed her something. Because that morning, when I walked into that bank, I felt invisible. I felt exhausted, judged, and honestly a little defeated. But one person reminded me that kindness still exists. Over the next few weeks, I learned more about what happened inside North LA Community Bank after that day. Trevor was removed from customer-facing duties immediately. The bank conducted a formal review, and his supervisors documented the incident permanently. To be clear, the issue wasn't that he questioned a transaction. Banks have rules for a reason. The issue was the way he handled it. There's a difference between protecting a business and humiliating a person. There's a difference between asking questions and making accusations. Trevor had forgotten that behind every account number is a person with a life, a family, and a story he knows nothing about. Some people later argued that Trevor was just doing his job, and that I only received an apology because of my connection to the bank. Others argued that it didn't matter who I was because nobody should be publicly treated that way without evidence. And honestly, that debate is what made me think about the situation even more, because maybe the real test of character isn't how we treat people who can help us. Maybe it's how we treat people when we believe they have nothing to offer us. A few months later, my brother fully recovered. He still jokes that his accident caused me to have the strangest banking experience of my life. Melissa did call me that Monday. By the way, she interviewed for the position, got the job, and became one of the strongest people on my team. Every once in a while, we still talk about that morning and how one small moment at a bank counter changed two completely different lives. But there's one detail from that day that I never forgot. Before I walked out, Karen Whitmore looked at the $320 check sitting on the counter and said, "It's amazing how something so small can reveal something so big." And she was right, because the money was never the story. The story was about judgment, dignity, and the choices people make when they think nobody important is watching. And sometimes, the person everyone overlooks is the person carrying the lesson everyone needs to learn. The more time passed after that day at North Valley Community Bank, the more I realized the strange thing about moments like that is they rarely end when everyone walks out the door. Most people think a confrontation is over when the argument stops, when the apology is given, or when someone walks away. But some moments stay with you because they force you to look at yourself and ask a harder question. What kind of person am I when nobody knows my name? That was the part of the whole experience that stayed with me the longest. Not Trevor's mistake, not the awkward silence in the lobby, not even the apology. It was the realization that every single person in that room had a choice. Trevor had a choice when he looked at me standing there exhausted and confused. The customers behind me had a choice when they heard him say the word fraud. Melissa had a choice when she decided to speak up. And I had a choice when everything was finally revealed and I had every opportunity to use my position to make someone's life miserable. The truth is, having power can be revealing. It shows you who you are when you finally have the ability to strike back. And I think that morning showed me something about myself too. I wasn't proud of being embarrassed. I wasn't happy about what happened. I was hurt. I was frustrated. I was tired. But somewhere between leaving the hospital and walking into that bank, I had already been reminded that life can change in a second. One minute you're sitting beside someone you love, wondering if they'll make it through the night, and the next minute you're standing in the bank lobby arguing over a $320 check. It made me realize that some battles just aren't worth carrying forever. A few months later, my brother Caleb was finally strong enough to joke about the whole situation. He loved teasing me about it. He would say, "You almost lost your patience over $320, and I'd laugh because, when you hear it that way, it does sound ridiculous. But I would always tell him it wasn't about the money, and he knew exactly what I meant. It was about being seen. It was about being treated like a person during a moment when I was already carrying more than anyone around me knew. That is something people underestimate. Sometimes the hardest moments in life are not the dramatic ones everyone sees. Sometimes it's the small moments where you're already exhausted, already overwhelmed, and one more unnecessary burden gets placed on your shoulders. Those are the moments that test people. I also kept in touch with Melissa after she joined my company. The funny thing is, when she first started working with us, she never brought up the bank incident unless someone else mentioned it. She wasn't looking for praise. She wasn't trying to become the hero of the story. She just saw something wrong and decided not to ignore it. And honestly, that quality is rare. A lot of people have opinions when they're sitting safely at home. A lot of people talk about doing the right thing when there are no consequences. But actually stepping forward when a stranger might look at you, when a room might become uncomfortable, when someone in authority might push back, that takes a different kind of courage. Melissa once told me she almost didn't say anything. She said she was already late for work. She had her own problems going on. And part of her thought, maybe someone else will handle it. But nobody did. And that's the uncomfortable truth about many situations in life. Everyone assumes someone else will step in. Everyone waits for the next person to act first. And sometimes, nothing changes because everybody is waiting. When I think back to Trevor, I still believe there was a lesson there too. I never hated the guy. I never wanted his life ruined. I never believed one bad decision defined his entire character. Maybe he was having a bad day. Maybe he had seen too many fraudulent checks and became too suspicious. Maybe he forgot that behind the paperwork was a real person. Whatever the reason, The moment gave him an opportunity to learn something that a lot of people never learn until much later. Professionalism is not just about following rules. It is about remembering the humanity behind those rules. Procedures exist to protect people, not to make people feel powerless. Security matters, but dignity matters too. And I think that's where the conversation becomes bigger than one thank employee and one customer. Because this happens everywhere. At stores, at workplaces, in neighborhoods, online. People make assumptions based on clothing, appearance, age, occupation, or the way someone speaks. We fill in the blanks with our own guesses. And sometimes those guesses become the way we treat someone. But guesses are not facts. A person who looks unsuccessful might be carrying a responsibility you could never imagine. A person who seems quiet might be fighting a battle they never talk about. A person who looks ordinary might have spent years building something extraordinary. You simply never know. Years later, I still have that old copy of the insurance paperwork from that day. Not because I need it, but because it reminds me of something important. That envelope represented one of the hardest days of my life, but it also represented one of the most meaningful lessons I ever learned. A small check revealed a big truth. Respect should never be something people have to earn by proving their importance. It should be the starting point, because at the end of the day, we are all just people walking through different chapters of our lives. Some chapters are successful, some are painful, some are messy, and sometimes the person standing quietly in front of you might be going through something you cannot even imagine. So I want to leave you with this question. If you were in that bank lobby that morning, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent because it was easier? Would you have spoken up like Melissa? Would you have defended Trevor because you believe he was simply following procedure? There are arguments on both sides, and that's what makes stories like this worth discussing. Because the real question isn't just who was right or who was wrong. The real question is what kind of world we create through the small choices we make every single day. If this story gave you something to think about, share your perspective in the comments. I'd genuinely like to know where you stand. Was this a case of necessary caution taken too far? Or was it a moment where basic respect was forgotten? And if you believe kindness still matters, share this story with someone who needs the reminder that every person has a story we cannot see. Because sometimes the smallest act of understanding can become the biggest difference in someone's day.